HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Moctu and the Mammoth People by Neil Bockoven. Read by Timothy Andrés Pabon. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. Genesis chapter 4, verse 8. Author's note: Our forefathers, early modern humans, EMHs, probably reached southeastern Europe less than 45,000 years ago. It's likely that EMHs and Neanderthals in Europe overlapped in time by less than 5,000 years, roughly 45,000 to 40,000 years ago, before Neanderthals became extinct. The rapid demise of the Neanderthals has been attributed to many possible factors, including genocide by EMHs, infection from EMH-carried disease, competition for food and resources, and climate change, although the Neanderthals made it through numerous periods of substantial climate change over the previous 250,000 years. The fossil record indicates that Neanderthals disappeared only after EMHs moved into their territory. Analysis of a deep sharp scratch on a rib of Shanidar III, an adult male Neanderthal who lived in present-day Iraq more than 50,000 years ago, suggests he was hit by a spear thrown by an EMH, according to Duke investigators. Based on the brief overlap in time of EMHs and Neanderthals in Europe, the fossil evidence, the rapid and truly massive extinction of large animal species following EMH entry to the Americas and Australia, and the xenophobic nature of early, and many would say current, man, I'd bet that genocide played a key role. However, EMH-carried disease is also a likely cause and is consistent with the data. In the early 1500s, Cortés unintentionally brought smallpox to the Aztecs and saw a die-off of between 60 to 90%. The Aztec Empire went from 30 million people to 3 million in just a few years, by some accounts. During the early 1600s, European settlers in New England saw a near eradication of the surrounding Native Americans as epidemics swept through the Massachusetts and Algonquin tribes, killing 90% or more of them. A great deal of research has substantiated that EMHs and Neanderthals interbred, and the average non-African person of today owes between 1 to 5%, generally 2 to 3% for Europeans, and higher for East Asians, of their genetics to Neanderthals. Neanderthal genetics have given us some good things like an increased ability to fight viruses and perhaps red hair. My first girlfriend Heather had red hair. But the Neanderthal genes also brought along some real negatives, including predispositions for type 2 diabetes, lupus, biliary cirrhosis, depression, nicotine addiction, actinic keratosis, and Crohn's disease. So for my Crohn's disease, I can thank my distant great-great-great, etc. grandfather Og. The story of Moctu takes place 45,000 years ago. Although some disagree, a host of researchers has concluded that something happened around that time that dramatically and beneficially impacted EMH development and their resultant diaspora out of Africa. Humans successfully made it north into Europe, and they were off to the races, overwhelming the Neanderthals and other hominids and spreading to all parts of the globe. Certainly population blossomed, and in what Jared Diamond has popularized as the Great Leap Forward, technology, culture, art, and music expanded more in the short period thereafter than it had in the past million years. Even if some of these technological and cultural breakthroughs had happened earlier, the intensification of them is undeniable. What caused this explosion of creativity and success? Various researchers have proposed a genetic change or changes, for example to the FOXP2 gene, which allowed for better language skills. Others have called on our interactions with the Neanderthals for better, e.g., technology transfer and modest beneficial gene flow, or for worse, Neanderthal predation that forced us to become the shrewd and at times bloodthirsty race we are. We'll probably never know for certain the cause or causes of the transformation, but that hasn't stopped us from speculating. A single breakthrough, such as mastery of fire starting, or the atlatl, spear thrower, which allowed for greater range and safety during hunting, could have played a major role. A small but consistent advantage can make all the difference. Just a 1% difference in mortality could have led to the extinction of Neanderthals and the supremacy of EMHs in as little as 30 generations, or about 1,000 years. As I grew up, typical depictions of Cro-Magnon/EMHs featured fair-skinned, fair-haired, blue-eyed people that looked like current-day Northern Europeans. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were stooped, darker-skinned, darker-haired, more ape-like, and let's face it, uglier. It's only been within the last decade that our perceptions of Neanderthals have begun to change based largely on genomic research, which indicates that European Neanderthals probably had some blue-eyed, strawberry blondes that in the right garb could easily pass by unnoticed on the streets of New York or Berlin. Okay, they didn't have the art, culture, tool-making, and probably language skills to the extent that EMHs did, but recent genetic findings, as well as archaeological discoveries, have had an enormous impact on our image of these people and reversed some long-held misconceptions. In this book, I've tried to strike a balance that shows EMHs as more advanced in many things, but suggests that Neanderthals had a lot to offer too. Did EMHs have more advanced language skills than Neanderthals? We can't be sure, but the answer is probably. Basque is the oldest European language, the only pre-Indo-European language of Western Europe, and there is a reasonable chance that it has the greatest similarity to the EMH language of 45,000 years ago. Genetic evidence exists for this as well. The R1b haplogroup, which originated in Paleolithic times, is more pronounced in the Basque population. I've therefore used more than a dozen Basque words, or derivations, for the EMH Nurayan peoples. There's one, a derivation of Nurea means mine or my people in Basque, words and names. Another is ETXE, pronounced Etza, meaning home in Basque, which is the name of their shelter. In 1980, I was enthralled by Jean Auel's Clan of the Cave Bear, as were millions of other readers. The story takes place about 30,000 years ago, largely in present-day Ukraine, where EMH and Neanderthal cultures encountered one another. At the time, Auel was praised for maintaining a high level of authenticity in her characters' lifestyles, cultures, and technologies. Recent discoveries and genetic breakthroughs, however, have changed our image of her characters' appearances and have pushed back the age of Neanderthal extinction from about 28,000 to about 40,000 years ago. So we've learned that many of Ayla's accomplishments and discoveries happened long after Neanderthals were gone. In this book, all accounts and descriptions of animals, rhinos, aurochs, caribou, wolves, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, etc., have been extensively researched and are realistic. All were present in Italy 45,000 years ago. In fact, even more recent images, from 17,000 to 36,000 years ago, of these animals can be found in the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet in France, as well as elsewhere in Europe. Based on the most recent archaeologic research, I've endeavored to make this novel as prehistorically accurate as possible regarding the tools and technology in use around 45,000 years ago. For instance, domestication of the horse had not yet happened, and dogs were either not widespread or non-existent. The bow and arrow were yet to be invented, while atlatls, or spear throwers, were more likely in use. Archaeological evidence for when humans learned the ability to create fire is more problematic. Clear use of fire by humans dates back at least 400,000 years, and perhaps as far back as 1.8 million years. Fire probably played an important role in evolution, allowing humans to extract more caloric value from food, thereby fostering the development of larger brains. But early fire use was undoubtedly opportunistic, that is, taken from a natural fire, transported to a hearth, and kept alive. I've taken the finding of transported embers found on the Ötzi Iceman as evidence that fire starting was difficult and perhaps impossible even as recently as 5,300 years ago. That said, it's hard to imagine Neanderthals surviving in places like Ice Age Germany for at least 250,000 years, relying solely on opportunistic fires. I hope you enjoy this story. Part 1. Moctu of the Narrator. Main characters and places. Moctu, young man of the Narrator people. Narrator, name of Moctu's tribe, means mine or my people in Basque. Etze, large rock overhang that the Narrator used for shelter, means home, if spelled E-T-X-E. Jabil, excellent young hunter, adversary to Moctu, wants leadership position in Narrator. Jandu, young hunter who is Jabil's ally. Ordu, leader of the tribe. Alta, Moctu's mother. Nuri, young dark-haired woman of the Narrator. Avi, young fair-haired woman of the Narrator. Nindai, lame young man training as a healer. Chapter 1. Northern Italy, about 45,000 years ago. As the burly men charged into the herd of caribou, Moctu could see that they were different, very different, and a chill rippled down his spine. These must be the pale ones, the people-eaters that Jonah and the older hunters warned him about when he was younger. Now a tall, well-muscled youth of 14 summers, Moctu remembered his father's description of the abandoned dwellings of the beasts, which had contained piles of charred human bones that had been split for their marrow. They had eaten people, lots of them. He shuddered, recalling the nightmares that followed, where he and 2 friends were captured and eaten by the creatures. His mind flashed on the dead raven he'd seen this morning. Certainly a bad omen, now proving true. Moctu could tell the men were huge, not tall, just thick. And spirits, they charged right into the herd, where even the cows could kill with their antlers. They were fearless. Things were happening so fast, he could see 3 of the men stabbing and slashing. The caribou were confused, but some began to break to the south toward him, retracing steps they'd taken this morning. He needed to get to the valley narrows fast. He had to make a kill. His people needed it. And if he could set up there, he thought he'd get a shot. Having spent most of the day tracking and running after the herd as it moved northward, Moctu felt the muscles of his legs groan in complaint as he sprinted toward the nearby spot where the stream and meadows funneled between low hills. But as he got there, the panicked beasts rounded a hill and arrived at almost the same time. They picked up unbelievable speed and thundered toward him in full stampede, now just half a stone's throw away. "Ooh, shit!" he hissed through clenched teeth. A turbulent sea of antlers was headed straight at him. Coming here had been a bad idea. He wasn't going to make it. It momentarily occurred to him that even if he did survive and was only injured, the pale ones would probably get him, and they would eat him. Chapter 2. The day had started out well. The morning air had been crisp, and the ground cool as Moctu flattened himself against the scattered rubble and shortgrass and peered over the crest of a low hill. He had used this hill before to scout caribou and other prey as they grazed on the grass, moss, and low shrubs near the stream toward the middle of the valley. The winter had been harsh, however, and this spring season hadn't brought the same numbers of game as in the past. Moctu grinned with satisfaction as he counted at least 7 hands of caribou, including 4 small calves. He touched the wolf-toothed talisman hanging from his neck and whispered, "Thank you, spirits, for bringing game, and so many. Our hunting group will be pleased." His smile broadened as he imagined how excited the hunters would be. It had been nearly half a moon since his people, the Narrator, had fresh meat, and everyone was tired of chewing on stringy dried remnants of past hunts. Watching the animals, Moctu began to evaluate options on the best way to attack the herd. It would be good to have a plan to recommend to Ordu and the rest of the hunting party when he got back to alert them. He felt honored that Ordu had given him this role, to scout the West Valley for game. He was one of the youngest allowed to participate in the hunt, having not yet reached his 15th summer. Although thin, he was tall and strong for his age, and Ordu said he was becoming a great hunter. Moctu couldn't spend much time planning because he needed to get back so that the bigger hunt effort could be implemented. All the men would be pleased, especially Ordu, a huge man and gifted hunter, but partially hobbled by a glancing blow from a wounded auroch 2 summers ago. He walked with a limp, but still covered distance quickly, and was nearly as good as before. Recently, Ordu had carried a worried countenance, as game sightings had been sparse, and the tribe, already thin from the winter, was getting hungrier. This was supposed to be the fat season, when his people built up their strength and weight to survive the next winter. As Moctu turned to leave, he stopped, motionless. Something was wrong. The herd was suddenly alert and nervous, staring toward the south. Although that direction was downwind, perhaps wolves or cave lions were approaching and had been seen or heard by the caribou. What the? He studied an old, wounded or sick caribou, slowly and clumsily, limping through the grass toward the main herd. It was only moments before Moctu recognized that the creature was a man wearing a caribou skin, and he knew immediately who it was. Jabil, only 2 years older than Moctu, was moving in for an attempt at a kill. "You hyena dung," Moctu thought. "You're going to ruin the hunt. We're supposed to get the larger group involved when we see this many animals, and you know it." Jabil had been told to scout the valley to the south, but he was here instead, jeopardizing the chance to kill multiple caribou. Moctu was torn between his responsibility to get back to the others and his disbelief as he watched Jabil ruin the hunt. Jabil edged closer to the herd and was now within range of the southernmost caribou, a mid-sized female with a calf nearby. The cow was just nosing her calf into moving when he rose up gracefully and flung a spear at her with his atlatl. The herd immediately surged away northward, but the spear took the cow between the shoulder and belly. It grunted loudly in pain and turned away, but couldn't keep up with the rest of the herd. Jabil shed his caribou cloak and pursued the stricken cow. The calf, which had remained close to its mother, finally turned and ran after the herd, now barely discernible through a dust cloud in the distance. Jabil, however, was keeping pace with the wounded cow. Moctu had seen enough and turned back to inform the hunting party. "Jabil, you slime scum," he muttered as he began running. He wondered what he should say to Ordu and the men. If he didn't handle it right, they'd just think he was being jealous. That was when he saw it. A dead raven on the trail. A bad omen. This was a definite sign, and he was going to have to be very careful about what he said. Jabil was Ordu's nephew, and it was well known that he and Moctu had quarreled several times in the past. Jabil was tall with high cheekbones and chiseled good looks. He moved with the self-assured poise of a leader, but he considered Moctu a rival for both the best mates and a future leadership position in the tribe, and he took every opportunity to belittle and sabotage him. The older boy had once wrestled him to the ground and pounded his head savagely against a rock while taunting him. 2 older men had to pull Jabil off him. That was after Moctu and Nuri, a cute 13-year-old girl, had been talking and laughing with each other. Jabil had won a claim with the tribe a year ago when he was key in locating a cave bear den, smoking it out, and with some help, killing it. The cave bear was enormous, weighing the equivalent of nearly 2 hands' worth of hunters, and it had been loaded with prized fat and rich meat. Jabil had been awarded the skull and fur to keep at his hearth to remind everyone of his accomplishment, made all the more remarkable by his relative youth. Even Jabil's fox totem had been changed to the bear totem. But today, it was just a selfish attempt for glory. Sure, he'd get a kill, but he probably ruined their chance to bring down lots of caribou, something that could have really helped the tribe. Cool wind blew Moctu's long, wavy brown hair back as he picked up speed on a downhill stretch. The men were going to be pretty upset about losing such an opportunity. It was his valley to scout, so they might even blame Moctu. If he wasn't careful, however, criticizing Jabil would only seem petty. Moctu slowed, thinking through alternatives. He'd just say what he saw with no comment. He decided that was best. When he found the hunting party, they were seated on some boulders around a small fire, but were in a state of readiness. Samar, a dark-bearded bull of a man, bellowed a friendly jab in his deep voice. "So one of our sorry scouts is finally back. What do you have for us?" Moctu noticed that Tabar, his stepfather, was also there, and he nodded to him. "I've seen 7 hands of caribou in the middle of the West Valley. Jabil has wounded or killed one," Moctu said, trying not to show any of the outrage that he felt. He was gratified when Ordu and some of the other men snorted in surprise and disappointment upon hearing of Jabil's action. 7 hands? Ordu asked. "And the herd? What of it?" "It's moved north, out of sight," Moctu replied, which prompted more grumbling among the men. As the group moved out, Ordu asked again, 7 hands of caribou? The men were soon running easily toward the West Valley, along a narrow trail through a low sedge of scrub oaks, beech, and small conifers. When they crested the hill, they could see in the distance the tiny shape of Jabil, working on gutting and cleaning the caribou. As Moctu had mentioned, the rest of the herd was no longer visible. As they pulled up closer to Jabil, he called out, "I've made a good kill. The tribe will finally have some fresh meat to eat." "How many were in the herd?" Ordu pointedly asked. "There may have been as many as 2 hands." Moctu remained quiet, knowing that the expert trackers in the group could tell that there had been many more, which was soon pointed out by Samar. "There are tracks for at least 5, maybe 7 hands of caribou here," he said. "Why did you make a lone attack when we could have made kills that would feed the tribe for a moon?" Jabil seemed ready for the question. "I've made a good kill here, which should make everyone happy. I attacked quickly because wolves were threatening to scare the herd." Ordu shot a glance at Moctu, and he shook his head imperceptibly, rejecting the comment. Ordu instructed several of the men to help with the cleaning and butchering. In a low voice, he asked Samar to scout the area for wolf sign. He told Moctu and Nabu, a tall, skinny, quiet young man, known as the fastest runner in the tribe, to track the caribou to the north, to see if they could be found within a suitable hunting distance. Chapter 3. Moctu had a hard time keeping up with the lithe and laconic Nabu, who ran almost effortlessly. He ran up the hills as easily as Moctu ran down them. They spoke little, focused on their running and on the ground to avoid the occasional cobbles that could easily turn an ankle. After running for half the morning, they stopped for water at the stream. Their bronze bodies dripped with sweat, and their hair was wet even before they began scooping large handfuls of cold water over themselves. They still hadn't located the herd, but the tracks and dung were extremely fresh now and indicated they were close. Continuing on, the two traversed along the side of a low hill, then crested a higher one before finally sighting the herd in the medium distance. The caribou had found a small portion of the valley where the dry, cobble-strewn ground had given way to darker, richer earth, where thick knee-high grass and clover grew. It appeared the herd was settled in and wouldn't be moving for a while. They carefully counted about 8 hands of caribou, and there was also a smaller group of red deer not far from the main herd. The young men were elated. This was wonderful, perhaps life-saving news for the tribe. Although not the huge herds of hundreds or sometimes thousands of caribou from years ago that they'd been told of by the older hunters, This was the most game anyone had seen for many moons. "It took us so long to get here, and only one of us needs to go back," said Moctu. "Want to pitch pebbles to see who has to do it?" Both young men knew that whoever had to go back was likely to be too exhausted to join the hunt after running here, there, and back, so they pitched pebbles to see who would stay, which of them could land their pebble closest to the gray sandstone boulder about 20 feet away. "Thank you, spirits," Moctu whispered to himself, briefly closing his eyes in relief as Nabu's pebble hit the rock and bounced beyond his. "Sorry, Nabu. Sorry that either of us has to go back." "Ah, don't worry, friend. I enjoy running," Nabu said with a smile. With that, the lanky, soft-spoken young man picked up his spear and started back to alert the hunting party. After he'd gone, Moctu drank deeply at the stream and chewed more of the stringy jerky. The sun was fully up, and he found it hard to keep his eyes open. Despite the excitement at the prospect of the coming hunt, Moctu was really tired. Including his early morning scouting, he'd covered a lot of ground today. He began to plan the coming hunt in his mind. It would be late afternoon at the earliest before the other hunters got there. If it was evening, they'd wait until daybreak. It would be too dangerous in the dark. At dusk, the herd was even more unpredictable, and it was easy to lose footing on the uneven ground. The wind was still from the north, and there was good cover from the boulders and the tall grass down there. As long as enough men came with Nabu, they could break into 3 separate groups, one each to the south, east, and west. Each group would creep close to the herd, and they'd attack it from several sides. The herd would be confused, and the men could keep throwing shafts while it milled around trying to figure out which direction was safe. It would probably break toward the north again, but not before they killed or wounded a bunch of them. His plan in place, Moctu continued to watch the herd. They seemed stable and unlikely to move soon. He began to daydream in the warm sun. His thoughts turned to Nuri. She was pretty, really pretty, with that long, lustrous, dark hair and her big, brown, doe-like eyes. He paused, imagining her face. She had all her teeth and a nice smile. She was a hard worker, and she was friendly, well-liked by everyone. She would make a good mate. Then there was Avi. He refocused on the other girl he often thought about. With her light brown hair and those beautiful, intriguing eyes, they were like green fire. A vision of her dazzling eyes came to him, and he smiled. She was really pretty, a good worker, and well-liked too. He remembered once, when helping Avi carry firewood, she smiled at him and said that he was very strong. He'd been at a loss for words and hadn't responded. Both girls seemed to like him, and both were nearing their first menses and would be placed with mates soon. His thoughts were interrupted by a change in the herd. They'd stopped grazing and were looking to the northwest. He strained his eyes in that direction to see what had made the herd suddenly nervous. Was it cave lions? He used his hands to block the sun from his eyes as he looked, but he could see nothing of concern. Some of the central animals gradually went back to grazing, while the peripheral, mostly male caribou, remained alert, continuing their watch. Moments later, he saw movement in the tall grasses. Actually, movement in 2 separate areas to the northwest. As he continued to watch, he saw for the second time today a man in a caribou skin moving toward the herd. Spirits. Not again, he thought. It couldn't be Jabil, but who? Then another man in a skin appeared a stone's throw to the south of the first. This couldn't be his tribe's hunting party. There was another group, a different tribe involved. He was fascinated because he was rarely exposed to other peoples except at the flint quarry, where several tribes would assemble each time 1 hand of years had passed. Could be our sister tribe, he conjectured. 12 members of Ordu's tribe had moved out 2 years before. The group included both Ordu's oldest son as leader and Moctu's uncle. Ordu's tribe had grown to number more than 80 members, making it difficult to find enough game and roots nuts and berries to feed them all. The tribe's women were...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?